So I've lived in London most of my grown-up life.
And I think he just continues to incite hatred and prejudice, and I think he should apologise.
Above all, we must tackle the housing problem with the same drive which we put into our war effort. Up till now, nearly all the builders have been at the wars. Up till now, those at home have been mainly absorbed in bomb repairs. But we are making good headway.
Englishmen, Irishmen, Scotchmen and Welshmen captured by the Iraqis. They said, we're going to fucking shoot you, but you can have one last request. Said the Welsh fellow, what's your last request? He said, I'd like 1,000 Welshmen singing Land of My Fathers. Said the Scotch fellow, what's your last request? I'd like 1,000 bagpipes playing the Flower of Scotland. Said the Irish fellow, what's your last request? He said, I'd like 1,000 Irishmen doing the river dance. Said the English fellow, what's your last request? He said, fucking shoot me first. He said.
All our freedoms are being eroded. Freedoms are being eroded, people. You've got to stand up. No freedom of speech. No freedom of protest. You've got to stand up to this tyranny.
The wealth of a British peer mostly comes down to the fortunes they inherit from their forebears, and in many cases, it's a lot. As of 2019, the average value of a peerage was £16 million, and the 10 largest personal fortunes inherited in the last decade add up to over £1 billion. Additionally, noble families can count on income from the many acres of land and historic properties they own, and a peerage can open doors to top schools and universities and many career opportunities.
So just think about this comparison. The length of time between the first settlement at Jamestown and the Declaration of Independence is roughly the same as the length of time between the Declaration of Independence and World War II. Okay, we tend to collapse all of early America into one big blob of early America, and we assume it's a kind of a small blob. But if you think about that, Declaration of Independence to World War II, Jamestown to the Declaration of Independence, we are talking about a broad expanse of time.
Humberside police say there's no link between the recent incidents. Today, back in Rutland Street, one councillor said enough is enough.
We need help from government. I would welcome a government minister to come here and, to be honest, sort this lot out. The drug dealers are seeing us as a dumping ground, they are, and we need to tackle it from above. Our local police force can't tackle it. They're trying their best, they're kicking in doors, but as one drug dealer is taken off, another one comes in. And I plead to government, I plead to the policing minister that we want help.
They're afraid of attacks on them or their properties if they speak out.
And increasingly people are saying, no, these are our fellow humans. They are not chattels. You cannot treat people as property, as cargo, as goods in this way.
Right? And these youths who are so red high, covetous, bad-minded, envious, because they will kill you for just what you have. How many youths out there right now would rob you of your mobile phone to go and sell that to buy a pair of trainers in one of the shops?
There are lots of young people here. You tell me.
Plenty of them out there would do that.
I personally think stop and searches, I think it worked. Hey, I'm speaking.
The Times and other magazines reviewing a London performance by the black actor Ira Aldridge could barely contain their distaste.
The features of this genuine nigger possess much of the African character, but are considerably humanised. Owing to the shape of his lips, it is utterly impossible for him to pronounce in English.
It is impossible that Mr. Aldridge should fully comprehend even the meaning of the words he utters. In the name of common sense, we enter our protest against a repetition of this outrage. In the interests of decency, we protest against a ladylike girl like Miss Ellen Tree being subjected to the indignity of being pawed about by this black servant.
Until the 1840s, These racial attitudes had little impact in Britain, but the advent of colonialism would turn them into opinions held in every quarter of Victorian England.
There is a real lot of misinformation going on about police officers killing black people in custody to destabilise and disrupt society.
OK,
So
we're going
I
to have
would
to
be
leave
very-
it there. Thank you very much indeed.
Enjoy.
Thank you. Hello?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Sir, we have a problem.
Yes.
You don't understand me, do you?
Yes. Yes.
And I think for a lot of people in that middle ground, they're struggling to find information that resonates with them, but also that they can trust. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of people kind of shouting from both ends and very little work being done to actually kindly and understandingly kind of talk to people and try and move them kind of from where they are. When people were talking about Muslims as well, when they were kind of expressing a lot of prejudiced views, they were very, very careful not to cross the boundaries of racism or what they perceived to be racism.
There are many instances in every life where one's self-deceptions begin to falter, presenting an opportunity to break down the false self. A process which, while difficult, is extremely beneficial in the long run. However, at such times, faced with the terrifying prospect that one's character was in many ways built on a lie, it is far more likely that people will flee further in the opposite direction.
So they were very, very careful in the language that they were using, but the kind of sentiments were still there. Quite often people were saying things that were kind of implicit. They never named an ethnic group, a nationality, or a religion, but the prejudice was very much there.
King George III created 170 new peers during his reign. But as these titles were hereditary, once the original lord died, his seat would be thrown to the genetic lottery. And the king would go on appointing new peerages to add more like-minded lords to Parliament.
And I think that's another thing that we need to try and kind of work out a language to talk about these things, because it's not enough to kind of put bans on things and say this word and that word are wrong and not deal with the insecurities and anxieties that are there as well. Of course, we're not pandering to prejudice. There's no way that we should do that. But it's finding a different way to start to deal with this, because unless we can talk to the people in the middle, the only people who are speaking to people with anxieties are those on the right. And that's really where they're kind of getting a hold at the moment.
In an attempt to win over the youth voter. I do think we should vote, though. I know that's unfashionable in stand-up comedy now, but I do think we should vote. Fair play, though, for bringing global capitalism to the attention of CBeebies viewers.
Settling disputes in Sharia courts, sending children to Islamic schools, campaigning for a caliphate. Some people might argue that if these are the freedoms that Muslim Britons want, then that's what they should have. Many would say it's their own business.
So, does it actually matter? After all, the phrase live and let live is probably the most commonly accepted expression of British tolerance, usually accompanied with a sort of, well, what can you do, shrug.
So I know that a lot of this is going to be about fake news and about kind of things that are happening online. We have seen a huge rise in this as well. So talking about kind of conspiracy theories.
But there is a problem with this live and let live, laissez-faire approach. Our survey revealed that the more people hankered after a separate life, the more sympathetic they were to violence and extremism. And that really does matter.
We've found this huge kind of growth in political mistrust, particularly since Brexit. And the Brexit process itself has felt like it's kind of contained in Westminster. Nobody is really reaching out to talk to people. So we've seen political mistrust grow. When political mistrust grows, people start to look outside the system. And when they look outside the system, they find the far right quite often. So 68% of people saying that none of the political parties speak for them. It's not much of a surprise in many ways, but it's what we do with that as well.
Everybody likes to live in that area where there is people's living, you see. Everybody like that. It is a natural thing, you see. It's quite natural. Where your friends living, you want to live there.
There is no right or wrong way of measuring sentiment on the use of violence, but we decided to use the word sympathy, expression of sympathy toward violence.
No, I don't think it's the question of they want to live alone. It's again, I would say the main problem is the language. They would mix up with the English community as they would with their own, but the main problem is lack of communication. And they tend to get together because they understand each other. And for example, a Pakistani is living among the British people, British families, where he can't make friends because of lack of language. I mean, he would naturally feel lonely, and he tends to go where some of his friends or countrymen are living.
Anti-Semitism. But also, I mean, looking at who's saying this, men were always much more likely to believe conspiracy theories than women. And I think when you're looking at your target audience as well, we've always found that it's middle-aged women who are most likely to shift. And it's also kind of talking about quite traditional gender roles, which is something we're often fighting against.
When Pakistani families visit each other, the husband opens the front door to ensure that his wife may not encounter a stranger.
Which is something we're often fighting against. But actually, talking about children and education with women has been kind of one of our most effective tools.
We wear dark clothes, trousers, no skirts, no obvious makeup.
It's not always something that we want to do, but there are always kind of trade-offs within this as well. Again, anti-Muslim prejudice, 32% of people believing this kind of conspiracy that there are no-go zones in Britain.
Hanover Square was once fashionable, but it has been taken over by immigrants.
There may be several reasons for not shopping would-be jihadists. One, of course, is that you might be sympathetic to their cause. What British Muslims think about terrorists' acts was the most difficult issue the survey tackled.
The respondent might not want to give truthful answers to questions because they're uncomfortable, giving them what we call social desirability bias, where maybe they kind of give the answer that they feel is the right one to give rather than the one that they truly feel. We see 6% of Muslims think it's acceptable or have sympathy for making threats of terrorist action as part of the political process.
So it's, I think, looking at your own position as well when we're talking to people. How are we going to move people if we don't quite understand where we are as well? And Brexit has changed the entire mood of the country. So one of the things that we always ask people is how optimistic they feel for the future. So the top left map is from 2016, just before the referendum. So green is pessimistic, and pink is optimistic for the future. So pre-referendum, unsurprisingly, it's Scotland, the key cities, Oxford and Cambridge, all the kind of university towns that feel most optimistic and most kind of like the future's bright. It's everywhere else that feels pretty pessimistic, like the system is not working for me. Brexit completely reversed that, so we've got this kind of inverted map on the top right. So what we saw was suddenly places that had felt that they hadn't been heard, that they hadn't had a chance to kind of have their say, had suddenly had their say. And what we found was that people really thought that Brexit was going to bring about prosperity, not just for the country, but for themselves personally.
Including the current prince, Charles. When Elizabeth's father became King George VI, she was not created Princess of Wales because, as a female, she was heiress presumptive, not heir apparent. The difference is that an heir apparent will definitely inherit the throne, assuming they outlive the monarch. An heir presumptive could still be displaced by someone else. Specifically, if King George had fathered a son, then Elizabeth's younger brother would have become monarch instead of her.
And that it was going to completely shift that kind of the way that power works in this country. That's probably not going to be true, who knows, but it looks highly unlikely, and it looks like the economic impacts are going to be most heavily felt in those areas that are newly optimistic. And I think when we talk about these things as well, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people who are working on anti-Brexit campaigns, and they're trying to talk about the fact that these economic impacts are going to hit these people worse. And what they've not understood is this optimism and the fact that that was a campaign that completely resonated with them and that they felt heard by. Moving on, 2019, so the bottom map, we are now overwhelmingly a country of pessimists.
And when it comes to the most extreme form of violence, suicide bombing, using explosives, for example, to meet political objectives, well, about 4% of Muslims express some form of sympathy with the more extremist end of it. 4% of them actually equates to just over 100,000 Muslims.
Use the hashtag, modify the branding and make it your own. We wanted it to appeal to everyone from age 8 to 80, something that would feel equally at home in a village community hall, a protest march, or on a festival main stage. With the launch of the rebrand, Hope Not Hate saw a 35% increase in people joining the movement and a never-before-seen increase of 50% in donated funds.
And the general trend is for the governments to be withdrawing support, withdrawing the social security safety net from people who desperately need that help. And basically it amounts to the government saying to individuals that really you must fend for yourself.
Stan and Georgina Wallace are people who can't look after themselves. Georgina is unemployed, Stan is on a pension. Together, they have to live on £73 a week.
Our income is lower than what our bills are. We have to juggle between bills, like if we got water and rent at the same time, I have to pay one or the other one.
I think when we're looking at these issues, it's easy to kind of jump the gap and look at kind of from one kind of end of the polarised spectrum to the other without realising that you're kind of alienating this huge graft of people in the middle who are those who will swing. Knowing your audience as well, I think our segmentation thing really, really helps us through our campaigns because we can kind of understand where people are coming from and what issues they're dealing with as well.
For example, a lack of social capital, not believing that you belong to Britain, not having that emotional attachment is one thing which somewhat correlates with it. If, as a Muslim, you don't have a desire to integrate into Orthodox British society, or indeed you want to practice a more fundamentalist Islamic lifestyle, or even submit to Sharia law in this country, all of these things, all of these attitudes, to some extent explain why people might move down that path toward violence.
It's not enough to kind of do a load of data work and assume that either, and people are always quite surprising as well, but it is trying to kind of get to the root of who it is you're talking to, rather than kind of putting out messages that you think might settle. Again, messaging to move and not preach. We hear this time and time again in the migration sector, people saying facts don't work, facts don't work. Facts can work so long as they resonate with people and what people see.
Britain faces a huge challenge. Adopting a policy of active integration may give rise to some ideas that make you, me, Muslims, non-Muslims, everyone feel pretty uncomfortable. But what is our choice? We could cross our fingers, close our eyes and hope that the segregation, the tensions, the periodic outrages and the backlash that follows will somehow simply vanish. Or we could seize the initiative. Take steps to support those Muslims who do want their communities to change in their attitudes towards women, towards lesbian and gay people, and indeed towards violence. I know which of those I would choose. A policy of active integration must be the first step on the path towards those shared values that will come to define what it means to be British, for Muslims and non-Muslims alike.
So it's not kind of necessarily kind of putting things on people and expecting them to kind of pick up kind of what you think they will from it, but it's more of a conversation. I think the other thing is kind of linking causes, sharing knowledge and collaboration. We are an anti-fascism organisation, and quite often we end up in that kind of migration sector bubble. Most of the issues we're dealing with and most of the issues that we're talking to people about are not migration related at all. It's about housing, it's about austerity, it's about not being able to get a doctor's appointment or not being able to get a school place. And quite often these things become funneled into kind of one cause, and we don't kind of deal with things across the spectrum.
Refreshment from start to finish.